Hi, welcome back. I'm Dan Hay. I'm a product manager with the Developer Tools Group, and I'm going to be talking to you about Visual Studio 7 and giving you a broad overview of what's coming with Visual Studio 7 in prelude of later technical sessions today on the details. Just to start out, I'd like to remind you that we definitely want to hear from you, so please send your questions, submit them in as we go here. I'll be taking those at the end of this session. You can do that either by emailing count@microsoft.com or using the chat box on your viewer. And then if you have questions about the availability of these presentations and when we will be releasing these materials to the field, you can either send email to Eric Gunvaldson, Kalindi, or go ahead and view the presentation this morning at 8 o'clock that David Lazar did, and he went over our schedule for releasing these presentations. So with that, let's kick it off. Basically, this first slide is talking about the development environment and how it's evolved. It wasn't too long ago that many of our customers were building client-server applications. And we think back on that time frame, and at the time we thought this was difficult stuff, but we look back and we see that we could plan the number of users that were going to be hitting our systems. We could put in downtime to perform routine maintenance on our applications. Development life cycles were great. They were 24 months, 36 months. We had lots of time to plan, lots of time to implement, and then basically let the application run its life cycle. The impact of the internet and competitive demands on that has changed things dramatically. Today, you really can't predict how many users potentially are going to be coming to hit your applications. And that holds true for both internally facing applications and external applications. If you're a global corporation and you've got 100,000 employees worldwide, you've got business partners worldwide that are going to be using these applications or your applications, they could be coming at any time of the day. So again, you have to have this application up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so you can't take it down for maintenance. Another impact has been that the development cycle has been dramatically compressed. So 6 to 9 month development cycles are very common. I've even talked to customers that are essentially on a consistent develop and release cycle, so they're constantly making changes to their applications. Competitive pressures are driving customers to really become more integrated and efficient. So they have to integrate their applications not only within their organization, but they're also starting to now look outside of their organizations to drive efficiencies and integrate with business partners. And then I think one of the key things that a lot of us have been hearing at Microsoft, and more so as the technologies have gotten more and more complex, is that we provide 5, 10 different ways to do a certain task. And what our customers are saying is we want to know, or they want to hear from us, what is the 1 or 2 ways that they should be implementing our technologies to be successful. So they really are asking us for architectural guidance. So on this next slide, basically, I'm showing what is our solution to this application environment that our customers are facing. And Windows DNA is the solution that Microsoft offers for building enterprise distributed applications. Windows DNA essentially is built, or the foundation of Windows DNA is Windows 2000 Server, along with the other server-based products that Microsoft offers. So SQL Server, Exchange Server, Commerce Server, Host Integration Server. We've got a really rich set of server-based services to help customers build these applications that are going to be able to serve up or deliver applications to clients on both Windows rich-based clients and on browser-based clients. And what we've been seeing recently and moving forward, expect more of, is this introduction of new form factors. So wireless devices, CE-based devices, cell phones, and form factors that we can't even predict yet. So Windows DNA is going to help you build these server-based applications that can address that whole range of clients that need to be using or accessing the applications. If you look back at the server side, Windows DNA helps you integrate to your data, so you can get your data out of SQL Server, you can get your data out of Oracle databases, Informix, DB2, wherever your data may lie, you have access to it through Windows DNA. That also holds true for integrating with existing applications inside of a corporation. So you may have legacy line of business applications running on Unix systems, on mainframe systems. You might have ERP systems or customer relationship management systems. All of these things need to be integrated or be integratable. And again, then moving forward, the competitive demands are having customers focus externally as well. So integrating with these business trading partners. People are now doing that, and Windows DNA offers some support for that. And one of the key technologies moving forward that we think is going to really help drive this integration, both internally and externally, is web services. So you've heard a lot about web services and the web services platform today already from both David Lazar and John Montgomery, but I'll just recap that fundamentally what web services are the ability to expose application functionality over the internet and to call that application functionality over the internet using simple text, so XML over HTTP protocol, so common open internet standards. So what can customers expect when they build these applications on top of the Windows DNA platform? This slide is essentially showing some industry benchmarks or some third-party benchmarks that indicate the type of performance and scalability that customers can get when they build applications on this platform. So I have two different benchmarks here. The TPCC benchmark is a common industry standard that measures database scalability. And if we look back historically, Microsoft has owned the top 47, 48 of 50 price performance results on the TPCC benchmarks, and this has been for the past 10 years. Recently, with the recent tests in February on Windows 2000 and SQL Server 2000, we now own the top 2 overall performance numbers for the TPC. So customers basically can build applications on top of the SQL Server database and the Windows 2000 server platform and get better performance than they can on any other operating system, any hardware device, any database platform. The other benchmark is a comparison or review of application servers that was done by a company called DocuLabs, which at the time was a subsidiary of Ziff Davis Labs. They're now owned by, I believe it's Aberdeen Consulting Group. But what they did is, it was about a year ago, they approached Microsoft and a bunch of the Unix application server vendors and had us and them submit a sample application, an online bookstore, that everyone had the ability to go down to their labs, install it on the hardware, tune it to their heart's content, and then DocuLabs basically did scalability, performance, and reliability testing on those applications. So the blue bars, what those are representing on this graph are the Unix entrants. And what you can see is that at the low end there was about a 400 page per second, and at the high end about 1,400 pages per second. So they scaled a pretty broad range of performance there. And those applications were running on 3 Sun servers for the application servers, and a Sun server and Oracle 8i as the database server. The cost of the hardware is about $430,000. Microsoft had 2 entrants, and we had a VB entrant, which was just straight VB components running, COM components running within transaction server, called by ASP pages and hitting a SQL Server database on the back end. So a very, very common customer scenario. That entrant came in at about 2,000 pages per second, so it dramatically beat all of the Unix entrants. We also had a C++ entrant, and that entrant came in at about 3,500 pages per second, so it even dramatically beat the VB entrant. The one thing that I like to point out about the C++ entrant is it's not necessarily a common customer scenario. What we did was we actually wrote our own custom ISAPI application, which replaced ASP. But what it does is it indicates to you that the type of performance that you can get if it's absolutely necessary to get the maximum level of performance from our platform. So with that, I'd like to start talking about Visual Studio 7 and give you the key features and highlights of what's coming with Visual Studio 7. I'd like to take a step back and say that when we sat down as a product team and started designing or talking about what were our goals for Visual Studio 7, we wanted to claim that, or we wanted to recognize that Microsoft has been seen as the leader in the RAD development tools category. So we've been, the marketplace views us very positively as addressing developer needs in the development stage of the enterprise lifecycle. But we've been a little bit, we've been dinged for being a little bit lacking in the rest of the enterprise lifecycle. So what we did is, with Visual Studio 7, is we made it a concrete goal to address the entire enterprise lifecycle as we built this product. Now today I'm going to discuss mostly the development environment and the development phase of the enterprise lifecycle, and over the next few months we'll be talking more about what the enterprise tools are that are coming with Visual Studio 7. So again, when we architected Visual Studio 7, we wanted to make sure that it was scalable and it supported collaborative team-based development so that people could plug into Visual Studio and basically use it as a hub or platform for enterprise development. So what this slide is showing is basically a logical architectural view of Visual Studio 7. And if you look at the lowest level on this layered architecture, what you're seeing is open internet standards. So XML, HTTP, SOAP, HTML, standards that everybody has access to, anybody can play with. So Visual Studio and the web services platform have that as their core foundation. The next rung up, what you have is the common language runtime and then the services framework. And these are the things that John talked about in depth and detail today. So basically, the common language runtime, the ability to for languages to share common data types and provide memory management and things like that. The services framework then is the building blocks that allow customers to build these distributed applications on top of the common language runtime and those open internet standards. And then, of course, at the highest level is the thing that the customer is probably used to seeing when they think of Visual Studio. It's the IDE, the designers, the editor, the tool itself that sits on top of all of these technologies. So what we're looking at now is a screenshot of Visual Studio 7. And the first thing that I'd like to point out is that we've now released Visual Studio 7 with one integrated shared IDE. So all of the languages in Visual Studio now share a common IDE. We have another new feature called the Visual Studio homepage, which we have been positioning sort of as a developer portal. What this allows you to do is to access applications that you're working on, create new applications, customize the IDE to behave or look in the way that you want it to work, access information both within the IDE and also externally on the web that might be appropriate to your tasks. The toolbox, again, now is shared across all of the languages within Visual Studio. So you're using a common set of tools regardless of the development language that you're implementing in. And of course, mixed language projects now are supported with one IDE. So you can, for example, in this case, I think I have a C#, a C++, and a VB application all within one solution. And one of the key benefits from mixed language projects and the common language runtime that I think John mentioned earlier was that you can have inheritance across those components. So if I write a component in C# or if I write a component in C++, I can inherit that component in VB and vice versa. IDE automation, what we've done is we've really opened up the extensibility model or opened up the automation model for Visual Studio with 7. We've exposed more of the interfaces for people to program against so that developers can create productivity macros and really drive the IDE from the macro environment. And the task window, again, now shared across all of the tools within Visual Studio, provides some key features such as the ability to pull out or parse on keywords. So, for example, the to-do keyword you can embed in your code and have the task list pull that out for you and basically create a remaining task item list for you to work on. Those keywords are customizable so that you can basically define your own and use that as a sort of task management window. The context window is the next version of the dynamic help, and it's much, much smarter than the dynamic help that exists today in Visual Studio. So for example, if you're searching on if in VB for help, you're going to get help on the if statement in VB and not if across all the languages and tools in Microsoft. It's even smarter in the sense that it knows the technology or what it is that you're working on and will provide related links or information that's appropriate to the task that you're working on. So if you're working on an ADO data set, there will be related information in the task window or in the context window that would help you with that task. It's extensible by customers so that if customers want to include or define their own additional help information or processes, they can link those to specific technologies and have that show up for their developers as well. And then the Server Explorer, which is a new feature that is sort of a developer-centric tool for locating server-based services that you would develop against. So SQL Server databases, Oracle databases, Exchange servers, message queues, event logs, performance counters, web services, all kinds of server-based services can be accessed through the Server Explorer. And I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail about a lot of these features, and you're also going to hear in more detail about some of these features in some of the later sessions as well. So this next slide is essentially talking about the key language enhancements that we've made with Visual Studio 7. So with Visual Basic, I think that the key thing that we've done with the language is we've brought it and made it much more modern in that we've now added true object-oriented features to the language. So you have inheritance, you have method overloading, and more of the object-oriented features that have been lacking in the past. You've also introduced structured exception handling. So no more on-error go-tos for implementing your error handling. You can now use structured exception handling like you do in most other modern languages. And then the ability to indicate the type of threading model that you want to develop against is also exposed in Visual Basic now. So you can do free threading applications to get better performance when you need it. With C++, there are two key things that we've done with the language in Visual Studio 7. So the first is this concept of attribute-based programming. And the way I like to describe this is it's like taking a keyword or a tag to indicate a big chunk of functionality. So for example, if you have a set of C++ classes today and you want to expose those as COM classes, today you have to go in and you have to write that COM plumbing code. With an attribute, what you do is you type in the COM attribute, and the compiler will spit in the COM plumbing code for you. And then, of course, you absolutely have the ability to go in and modify that code if you want, or just compile it and have that done for you. Managed extensions for C++ are a key technology that are going to enable the C++ developer to take advantage of the web services platform. So the key scenario we think that this technology will be used for is customers who have a lot of legacy C++ code and applications that they want to move or migrate to take advantage of features and capabilities in the web services platform. They'll be able to do that through managed extensions for C++. And then finally, a new language that we're introducing called C#, which was targeted at the C++ developer who wanted a more modern, rad, object-oriented language that was going to make them more productive than they are in C++ today. But who maybe thought that a language like VB didn't quite give them the power and flexibility that they were demanded. So the key thing that we see coming from this shared IDE and enhancements in the language with Visual Studio 7 is an increase in developer productivity. So training costs should go down dramatically as developers basically have shared set of tools that they're using across languages. We've enhanced designers so that a lot of tasks can now be done much more quickly and visually. We've improved dramatically the debugging process so that you can also now debug across processes and projects. So the next few slides, I'm basically going to start to talk about some of the key technologies coming out of the web services platform and how Visual Studio is going to leverage those technologies and make developing on top of them very, very simple for developers. The first technology that I'm going to talk about is web forms. And we basically think that web forms is going to do for web developers what Visual Basic 1.0 did for Windows developers. The concept is that you've got a design surface and you've got code, or you've got controls, and you visually drag and drop those controls onto your design surface to lay out your web page and what it's going to look like. And then you double click on those controls and the event editor comes up and you enter in your business logic behind those controls in VB, C#, or any of the languages that support the web services platform. One of the key points is that the controls themselves run on the server and they generate pure HTML 3.2. So we're not requiring any special browser on the client. Any browser that supports HTML 3.2 can access these web applications. You also have the ability to dial up or dial down. So if you know that your client base is going to be taking advantage of Netscape 5 or IE5, you absolutely can take advantage of those features. And you can dial it down to take advantage of, maybe you've got a bunch of clients that are going to be using cell phones and you want to send WAP source across to them for rendering on those devices. You can do that with the web controls as well. So you have a very broad range of devices that you can support intrinsically with web controls in Visual Studio 7. One of the other key things is that we're working closely with the control vendors today who build these ActiveX controls that VB developers are so used to using. And many of these control vendors are under work producing versions of those controls that will be available for building these web applications when we ship Visual Studio 7. So one final point that I'd like to make is that with web forms, the UI is separated from the business logic. So you can have designers basically working on the UI and laying out how the page is going to look while your developers are implementing the business logic, and they're not going to step on top of each other. And I guess one other key point to make too is that with the code that you're putting in there, since it's VB or C# or any of the languages that support the web services platform, it runs compiled on the server. You absolutely are going to get better performance and easier maintainability of that code base. So the next key technology that I want to talk about is web services. And again, in Visual Studio 7, I think the key point to make is that we are going to make it drop dead simple for developers to both create web services and consume web services within Visual Studio 7. So you're going to be able to take any COM component, any method on that COM component, and very, very simply expose it as a web service to be callable over the web. You're also going to be able to go ahead and leverage web services that are available and develop against them just like they're COM objects on your machine today. And that's regardless of the platform that they are implemented on. So they could be a mainframe application or an EJB Bean running on a Linux server. You will be able to develop against that just like it's a COM object on your machine today. And with that, actually, let me do a demo that shows the web services and web forms and how they're going to be implemented inside of Visual Studio 7. So the first thing that I'm showing here is a web page of a company called Metropolis, who is a shipping company. And what we're looking at is a list of the packages that have been requested for delivery by one of their customers, Market Florist. There's also a button on that page that says Schedule Pickup. So what I'm going to show you first is how simple it is with Visual Studio 7 to create that web application that's going to let me schedule a pickup online. So now what I've done is I've opened up Visual Studio 7, and what we're looking at is the shared HTML designer, and I'm going to go ahead and visually design this form or application that's going to let me schedule pickups online. So again, I'm going to take some controls basically and drag and drop these onto this design surface to visually lay out how I want my application to look. And what you're going to see here is I've dropped a web calendar control onto this page, which is a pretty rich looking control. But again, this control runs on the server. It knows how to render itself in a wide variety of ways so that it can support platforms, basically any platform that supports HTML 3.2. And I'm going to go ahead and put a button on here as well so that I can submit this request. Now the other key point that I made was that VB developers are going to really resonate with this drag and drop sort of form design layout. But also the other thing they're going to resonate with is double-clicking on the control and bringing up the event code editor and going ahead and entering in their event source code. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and use my little demo trick and drag and drop some pre-existing code into this method. And then that's basically all I need to do to create this application. So I'm going to go ahead and save it and run this application. And what we're going to be able to do is to go into the Metropolis site and schedule a request for a pickup online. And you'll see how easily this application was generated. It just takes a few seconds for it to spin up. Okay, so here's the Metropolis site, and I'm going to go ahead and click on this button to get to the application that I just created using Visual Studio 7. And here's this web calendar control. And you'll notice that if I click on these dates, that it's actually making server round trips. And that's because I did target HTML 3.2. If I had targeted IE5 or Netscape 5, it would have been much more intelligent and stayed on the client. So let me go ahead and request that package. And you can see, there it is. I've selected that package for delivery. So the key points with that are that very, very simple to go ahead and build these web applications with the existing skill set that over 3 million VB developers have today. So we're going to make it very simple and very comfortable for those VB developers to take their existing skill set and the way that they build applications today and churn that right to building applications on the web tomorrow. So the next part of this application is I want to go back actually to the Market Florist website. So this is the customer whose packages we were looking at the Metropolis site. And I actually have an account at Market Florist. So I'm going to go ahead and log in there and see the orders that I've placed with Market Florist and try and find out what the status is with that. So I can see I have a couple of orders here, and one of the things that sort of irritates me is that there's no shipping information on there. So today what happens is Metropolis actually sends me an email with the shipper ID, tracking number, and I have to go off to the UPS or the FedEx site or the Metropolis site and find out what the status is. So it's a little bit of an annoyance for me, particularly if I've synced my email and I'm offline and don't have that. So what I want to do next is show you how with the Metropolis, what I can do with Metropolis is expose that functionality as a web service and then hook that into the Market Florist site so that Market Florist can provide a better user experience seamlessly on their application. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio 7 in the Metropolis application, and this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a component. In this case it's Visual Basic, it could be C#, it could be C++ with managed extensions, or any language that supports the web services platform. And I'm going to expose this method as a web service. So I've got one method, getPackageStatus, and I'm going to expose that as a web service, I basically type in this keyword, dimwebpublic. And I'm going to go ahead and compile this. Now, when we release the product, you won't type in a keyword, but it'll be as a property setting on the individual methods. But what happens is when I go ahead and compile this, the compiler sees that keyword dimwebpublic, and what it tells it to do is to create an XML file that describes the component, the methods on that component, the parameters required, what they're going to return, and properties, and publishes that XML file to the web along with the component, so that somebody who wants to can consume that XML file and understand how to interact with this component. So what I want to show you before I hook that into the Market Florist application is that I can actually invoke that component by simply typing in an URL into my browser. Now this is going to be a little bit hard to see. I apologize for the font size here, but basically the URL I typed in was I called the Metropolis site, I called the name of the component that I just created, so component 1, this keyword methods, and then I typed in the method name, getPackageStatus, and I passed in the parameters as simple HTTP URL arguments. And what I get back is this XML blurb as the result. So the key point here is that it basically really is just XML over HTTP that lets you invoke these components. More interesting, of course, will be when we hook this into the Market Florist site and provide a seamless action there. So the next step that I'm going to do is go back to Visual Studio and open up the Market Florist application, and then I'm going to hook up that web service to the Market Florist application. So the first thing I need to do here is to actually tell Market Florist or Visual Studio that I'm going to be using that web service. So what I'm going to do is go to the Server Explorer, and I'm going to go ahead and look at the available web services for me to develop against. So I've got this pointed at a server that has a bunch of different server-based services available, and I go down here to the web services, and I can see a bunch of web services, and here's the Metropolis component 1 that I just created. And I can see the getPackageStatus method. So this is what I want, so I'm going to go ahead and right mouse click on this and add a reference to this to my project. So now what Visual Studio is doing is it's actually going out and reading that XML file that got published, parsing it, and adding a reference to that web service to my application here. Now obviously the one I just created was in VB, but the key point to keep in mind here is that that XML file and web service can be running on any platform, on any hardware system, on any operating system, and I'm going to be able to develop against it intrinsically using the productivity tools inside of Visual Studio 7. So the next thing I want to do is I need to add the status field to my data grid so that I can display that shipping status within the application. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to go down here and go ahead and add status and accept that. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and double click on this control. So again, something that VB developers are very familiar with today, and bring up the event code editor. And again, I'm using Visual Basic, but it could be C#, C++ with managed extensions, or any language that supports the web services platform. And before I have some code that I'm going to drag and drop in here, but before I do that, I want to show you that if I create a new reference to that web service, that I get full IntelliSense support against it. So again, I'm getting the key productivity features available inside of Visual Studio against this web service, just like it's a COM object on my machine today. So that's a very, very key productivity message, we think, for developers. And now I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop my code into this method and save this. And then let's run it. So now what should happen is we'll get the Market Florist application. I'll sign in, and what should happen when it goes to display my list of orders, it should also have another column on the end there that includes the shipping status, where it went out and called the Metropolis web service and got that shipping status dynamically and then provided it to me seamlessly, giving me a much better customer experience. Okay, let's log in. And there we go. So you can see that the status now is showing up on my order list. So again, the key points with this is that with Visual Studio 7, we have made it very, very simple for you both to expose and create that web service, so which I did with the Metropolis get package status method, and then to consume it and develop against it with all the key productivity features available in Visual Studio. All right, so let's go back to the slides. And continue with the features. All right, so some more of the key features or key technologies that are coming out of the web services platform and how Visual Studio is going to leverage those and take advantage of those technologies. So ADO Plus is the next release of our data access technology. If you think about it today with ADO, you can do distributed applications and you can do disconnected data, but it's not easy and it's not the default. So you have to go in and create those disconnected record sets, and you're still passing around a relatively heavyweight object among your application or throughout your application. So with ADO Plus, we basically re-architected the data access technology from the ground up with disconnected distributed data as the primary goal. So there's a couple of key objects that come with ADO Plus, and I'm not going to go into detail on those today because you're going to have a whole session on that later this afternoon. But basically the concept is that you have a number of different ways that you can access and work with that data. And that is, you can look at it relationally, you can look at it through an XML DOM view, or you can access it through what we're calling strongly typed objects. And I think I'll focus on the strongly typed objects because I think we all know what the relational access view is, and we know what the XML DOM view is. So the concept with the strongly typed objects is that in the case where you know what your data looks like, it's much more intuitive and actually much more performant to access your data directly. So for example, if you've got a customer orders table, maybe you want to have customerorders.name be the way that you programmatically access your data instead of recordset.row.field.0. So within Visual Studio 7, we're going to make it, we produce designers that make it able or enable you to create these strongly typed data objects where you know what your data looks like. One of the other key things with ADO Plus, or design points with ADO Plus, was that in addition to architecting it for distributed applications, we also wanted to remove any of the black boxes that kind of exist today with ADO. So we absolutely do a lot of default things for you, but you have complete control as the developer implementing this, how those things actually get implemented. So if you need to replace the way that the data gets updated, you can put in stored procedures, you can put in new components, new scripts. It's completely open and extensible for you as the developer to make those decisions on how that technology actually gets implemented. Another key feature that's coming with Visual Studio 7 is the Server Explorer and what we're calling the Component Designer. And between these two things, what we really think we're providing is RAD for the server, so Rapid Application Development for the server. And again, the Server Explorer basically is this developer-centric way to discover server-based services that you will be developing against. So databases, Exchange servers, message queues, performance counters, event logs, web services, all kinds of server-based services. And then the real power, we think, comes in when you combine that with the component designer. So let me just give you a scenario. Today, if you're building a message queue, every time you do that message queue, you have to create the plumbing code that connects to that message queue. And that plumbing code is identical every single time. Tomorrow, when you use Visual Studio 7, what you're going to be able to do is use the Server Explorer to locate the message queue you want. Then you will drag and drop that message queue onto the component designer, and the plumbing code gets generated for you, so that all you have to do is implement your business-specific logic. Take that and apply that across server-based services, and we think that we are really going to dramatically increase productivity on building these business tier components. I'd also like to talk briefly about integration and interoperability in our approach. If we look back historically, Microsoft has pretty much taken a strong, tightly coupled approach to integration and interoperability. So, we've provided things like OLEDB providers and CICS transaction connectors and MSMQ bridges and technologies that basically bind tightly to specific other technologies on other platforms. Now, we absolutely are going to continue to improve and enhance those technologies. But in addition, we think that there's also this loosely coupled approach, and that depending on the situation, either or approach may be appropriate. And the loosely coupled approach, of course, the key technology driver for that is web services and the SOAP protocol. We also think that BizTalk Server is going to help facilitate this loosely coupled approach in specific business-to-business transaction scenarios. And finally, I'd like to talk about the extensibility and some of the partnerships that we've made with Visual Studio 7. So again, I mentioned early on that we have, with Visual Studio 7, have opened up a lot more of the object model or the automation model for Visual Studio, so that you essentially, as a developer, can write macros that drive the entire Visual Studio IDE, including all of the commands, so that you can create all kinds of great productivity macros to help you in your development process. You can take it actually even further, and you can do things like create your own project subsystems, create your own designers, and really get in and take advantage of the shared features across Visual Studio 7. And what we did to formalize that process for people that wanted to really get that tight level of integration with Visual Studio 7 was we created a program called the Visual Studio Integration Program. And what that is we basically work with third-party ISVs who want to integrate their tools into Visual Studio, and we provide them with the APIs and access to all of the shared features in Visual Studio. So the property window, the toolbox, the project explorer, the dynamic help window, all of the features within Visual Studio, these ISVs have the ability to leverage and take advantage of. So what they do is they build a version of their product that runs within the Visual Studio shell, looks like it's part of Visual Studio, and uses these shared features so that developers will have a much broader range of tools to select from when using Visual Studio 7 to meet their application needs. And I think that wraps up the presentation or overview on Visual Studio 7. So now I'm going to go ahead and open this up for questions from the field.
Okay, we have quite a few questions for you. Let me just plug in here. Okay. One moment. Okay, first question. Yes, as I catch up here. Okay, is Visual Studio 7 intended also to replace or integrate the Visual InterDev functionality? And if so, what, if any, support is there for HTML, DHTML development, including client-side scripting?
Okay, so that's a great question. So Visual InterDev as a standalone product does go away, but all of the features that were within Visual InterDev are now shared across the tool set in Visual Studio. So what we found was that most of the developers doing Visual InterDev work were also doing component development with VB or C++. So we thought it was more productive for developers if we actually made those features available across all of the tools in Visual Studio. You absolutely can continue to do HTML-based development. We have new features within those editors, so that HTML design view that I was looking at, things like IntelliSense for HTML, so statement completion for HTML. You absolutely can do DHTML within the environment as well. So we are continuing to support those features with Visual Studio 7.
Okay, and a follow-up question. What about support for XML and XSL in particular?
So I'm actually going to punt that a little bit, other than saying that there definitely are features that are supported. We have a lot of features that support XML and XSL in Visual Studio 7. But the presentation on data is actually going to cover some of those features in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to punt the question.
I believe Dave will cover that in the next presentation. One last follow-up question is, what about the wireless world and WML?
So WML, is that a variant of WAP? I'm actually not familiar with WML. What about it? We absolutely are supporting WAP with the web controls that we are providing, so that if WML is a variant on that or it becomes an industry standard, I imagine that we would explore including that in future releases as well.
Yeah. And Dave will also follow up on that question a little bit further. So next question is, one moment here. Okay, can you talk about the Flora site exposing the shipping status to be used by other apps? Can the Flora site expose the shipping status to be used by other applications?
That's a great question, and actually, I mean, it absolutely could. Now, it's going to depend, obviously, on the relationship that they have with the Metropolis site, because Metropolis is the originator of that web service. But Market Florist, if Metropolis, agreed to that sort of functionality, Market Florist absolutely could write another wrapper web service on top of that and expose it themselves and add additional functionality.
Okay, great. Another question. Will there be a view of web services available enterprise-wide, or is it per server?
That's a good question, and I don't know if we have a specific answer on that. I know we are addressing that, so that is I think John probably spoke of some of the additional protocols that were going to be built on top of SOAP, and some of those are addressing discoverability and how do you publish these web services and make them discoverable. So I don't know the specific answer to how we're going to implement that, but I do know people are working on coming up with good solutions for that question.